the previous lesson, we saw that the Industrial Revolution gave humankind control of enormous sources of energy and of raw materials. This largely liberated humankind from its dependence on the surrounding ecosystem. Humans were able to cut down forests and jungles, to drain swamps, to dam rivers, to flood plains, to lay down tens of thousands of kilometers of roads and railroad tracks, and to build new and giant cities. As the world was molded to fit better the needs and whims of Homo sapiens, so habitats were destroyed and animal and plant species went extinct. Today, the continents of the Earth are home to almost 7 billion sapiens. If you took all these people and put them together on a very large scale, their combined mass would be about 300 million tons. If you now took all our domesticated farmyard animals, cows and pigs and chickens and so forth, and placed them on a very big scale, their mass would be about 700 million tons. In contrast, if you now take all the surviving big wild animals of the planet, penguins and ostriches and lions and crocodiles and whales and dolphins and so forth, and put all of them on a very big scale, nobody knows exactly how much they will weigh together, but it is estimated to be less than 100 million tons. Less than 10% of the big animals of the world, oceans and continents together today, are wild animals. The vast majority are us, Homo sapiens, and our domesticated and enslaved farmyard animals. Our children's books, our TV screens, our films, they are still full of giraffes and wolves and chimpanzees and elephants and lions and so forth. But the real world has very few of them left. There are, for example, just about 80,000 giraffes left in the world compared to 1.5 billion domesticated cattle. There are only 200,000 great wolves remaining in the wild compared to 400 million domesticated dogs. There are only 250,000 chimpanzees compared with about 7 billion Homo sapiens. So it's clear that we sapiens have taken over the world and we today control it. We should note, however, the difference between this kind of ecological destruction, which we are causing the natural habitats and the wild plants and animals around us, and the problem of resource scarcity. As we saw in the previous lesson, the resources available to humankind are actually increasing all the time, and they are likely to continue doing so. That's why the doomsday prophecies about humanity running out of resources and energy are probably incorrect. In contrast, however, the fear of ecological destruction, the fear that humankind is destroying the ecosystem around it, this fear is far more justified. In the future, in the not-so-distant future, we may have enormous resources at our disposal, but simultaneously, most of the natural habitats of the world will be ruined, and most of the species of animals and plants and so forth will become extinct. In fact, this ecological turmoil, the destruction of habitats and species, might endanger even the survival of Homo sapiens itself, despite all the resources and energy that we acquire. Processes such as global warming, the rising oceans, and the widespread pollution of the air and water and earth could turn our planet into a far less hospitable place for our kind, and the future might consequently see a kind of race between human power and humanly caused natural disasters. As humans use their power to control the forces of nature and to change the ecosystem to fit our needs and our whims, we might be causing more and more unanticipated and dangerous side effects like global warming, which nobody wanted it. It just happened as a side effect from all the things that we do. In order to control, in order to stop these side effects, we will have to take even more drastic action. We will have to make even more drastic manipulations of the ecosystems. And this could result in even worse chaos. Many call this kind of race, of this process, the destruction of nature, and say that humankind are currently destroying nature. But to put things more correctly, it's not really the destruction of nature, it's change. Nature as such cannot be destroyed, it can be changed. Species can become extinct, habitats can become totally different, but this is change. 65 million years ago, an asteroid from outer space hit Earth and wiped out the dinosaur, completely changing the ecosystem and opening the way forward for mammals. Today, humankind is doing something similar. It is changing the ecosystem. It is driving many species to extinction, and it may even annihilate itself. However, there are organisms who are having a good time out of all these changes. Rats and cockroaches, for example, are having a great time today. Perhaps rats will flourish more and more and would evolve to become these super intelligent, powerful rats. And 65 million years from now, in the future, intelligent rats will control planet Earth, and they will look back gratefully on the destruction caused by humankind that opened the way for the rats to take over the planet. Just as today, we think about that asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs as something good, not as something bad. But this is in the far future. At present, it's far too early to speak about the extinction of Homo sapiens. On the contrary, over the last 200 years, the human population of the world has only been growing and growing as never before. In the year 1700, before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, planet Earth was home to about 700 million humans. By the year 1900, there were 1.5 billion humans. In the year 2000, there were already 6 billion humans, and today we are nearing 7 billion sapiens on Earth. So, at least so far, we are not becoming extinct, we are becoming more and more numerable. While all these sapiens have grown increasingly free from the forces of nature, we are less subject to the forces of nature, we are becoming increasingly subject to new forces, to the forces of modern industry and government. We care less about nature and the cycles of rain and sun and summer and winter and so forth, but government and industry have much more power than ever before to change us. The Industrial Revolution opened the way to a long line of changes and experiments in social engineering, and also to a long series of unpremeditated changes in the daily life of humans and in human mentality. Changes that nobody wanted and predicted, they simply happened. One example, there are many, many examples. I'll give just one important example so you understand what I'm talking about. One very important example of what happened over the last 200 years was the replacement of the rhythms of traditional agriculture with the uniform and precise schedule of industry. Traditional agriculture depended on cycles of natural time and cycles of organic growth. Most societies did not have clocks and exact timetables. What they cared about is the natural cycles of day and night, the movement of the sun, and the natural cycle of the seasons and the growing of the plants, summer and winter, spring and autumn, and things like that. For most of history, there was no such thing as a uniform working day, that you do the same thing every day all year around. Rather, the routines of humans changed quite drastically from one season, say spring, to another season, say autumn. People knew and cared about the sun, where the sun was in the sky. They all the time watched very anxiously for the signs of the changing of the seasons. But people did not care about the hour or about the year. They didn't know what hour it is now or what year it is now. In contrast to the medieval peasants and shoemakers, they didn't care about hours and years. Modern industry cares far less about the sun and the seasons, and far more about precise and uniform schedules that don't change between one season and the next. To understand why, consider the way in which a medieval workshop functioned compared with a modern factory. In a medieval workshop, each shoemaker made the entire shoe. From the sole to the buckle, all the shoe was made, all the parts, by a single shoemaker. So, if a shoemaker was late for work, it did not bother, it did not stall the work of the other shoemakers in the shop. However, in a modern shoe factory, in a modern assembly line of shoes, every worker does only a very small part of the process of producing a shoe. Every worker works alongside a single machine that does just one tiny thing, and then the shoe is passed to the next machine in the assembly line until the entire shoe is complete. Now, what happens if in a modern factory a worker who is operating, say, machine number 5 out of 20 machines has overslept and this worker does not show up for work? All the other workers are also slowed down or stopped, because you cannot have the other 19 machines in the assembly line working if machine number 5 doesn't work. It won't do. In order to prevent such problems, everybody in a modern industrial factory must work according to the same precise timetable. Each worker must arrive at the factory at exactly the same time when the shift begins. Everybody take their lunch break together. It doesn't matter if they are hungry or not. If now it's lunch break, everybody eats. Everybody go home exactly at the same time when the whistle announces that the shift is over. When you finish making the shoe, you don't go home. You wait until the shift is over, and only then you go home. The Industrial Revolution thus turned the timetable and the assembly line into the basis for production, for industrial production, and into the basis of all other human activities. Because all other human activities began to copy and to adjust to the techniques of the factory. Shortly after factories began to impose strict timetables on human behavior, schools adopted also timetables. Why schools? both because people imported industrial methods of production to schools, which were thought about as factories for producing knowledge and factories for producing workers, and also because people said young children have to get used to working and living according to schedule, because this is what they'll have to do as adults, so we have to get them used to it already as children. And the same logic entered not from the factories, it entered not only the schools, but also hospitals and prisons and shops and all other aspects of modern life. It all runs according to precise schedules. A very crucial link in this spreading of the timetable was public transportation. If workers need to go to get to the factory and start their shift exactly 8 o'clock sharp in the morning, then the train or the bus must reach the gate of the factory at least 5 minutes earlier, at 7:55 in the morning. Even if there is just a few minutes delay, the result will be that some workers will be late for work and production will be lower, and perhaps the workers will be fired because they are late. So one of the things that happened is the appearance of precise timetables in transportation, which was never the case before. The first timetable in British history of a transportation system was published in 1784. It was the timetable of a carriage service of carriages with horses that connected different cities in Britain. Now, this first timetable, it's very interesting. The first timetable of these carriages, it specified only the hour of departure, not the hour of arrival. Partly because nobody could tell how long it will take a carriage to reach from London to, say, Birmingham, but more importantly, because each city and town in Britain of those days, like in the rest of the world, had its own local time. And the local time in Liverpool or Glasgow could be different from the time in London by up to half an hour. For example, when it was 12 o'clock in London, it was perhaps 12:20 in Liverpool and 11:50 in Canterbury, or vice versa. Since there were no telephones, no radios, no televisions, and no fast trains and cars, nobody could know that there was a difference between the time in London and Liverpool, and nobody cared. I mean, what difference does it make? When trains began to connect the different cities of Britain, and when there were timetables for these trains, because the trains were much faster than the old carriages, suddenly it became a problem that different towns and cities had different hours, different clocks. So in 1847, British train companies met together for a conference, and they agreed that from that moment onwards, all timetables of all trains would be given according to the time in Greenwich Observatory near London, and not according to the local times of Liverpool or Manchester or Glasgow. And in the following years, more and more institutions began to follow the lead of the train companies, adopting Greenwich time and not the local time, until finally, in the year 1880, the British government took an unprecedented step in the history of humankind and legislated by law that all timetables in Britain must follow the single time of Greenwich. It was the first time in history that an entire country adopted a national time and obliged its population to live according to an artificial clock and not according to the local clock of sunrise and sunset cycles. From this modest beginning, eventually was created a global network of timetables synchronizing all the activities of humans around the world down to the tiniest fractions of a second, in order to make sure that everybody follows the same timetable. Cheap but precise portable clocks became ubiquitous. In ancient cities, there were hardly any clocks at all. In medieval European cities, there was usually just a single clock. In the whole city, just one clock. It was a giant mechanical clock mounted on the top of a high tower, usually in the square of the town. These tower clocks were notoriously inaccurate, but since there were no other clocks in town to contradict them, it hardly made any difference that they were not accurate. Today, a single usual family generally has in its disposal more clocks at home than an entire medieval country. You can walk around your house, do an experiment, walk around your house and count all the different devices that tell you what time it is. People have clocks, watches on their hands. They have clocks that tell them the hour on their cellular phones. They have alarm clocks next to their beds. They have clocks on the walls, in the kitchen, in the living room. There is a clock inside the microwave. There is a clock inside the TV, inside the DVD, inside the computer. It's almost impossible to look anywhere in a modern house and not see a clock. And the typical person consults these clocks several dozen or even several hundreds times each day, because almost everything we do according to these precise timetables. Many people wake up in the morning, not when they want to wake up and not when the sun comes up, but when an alarm clock wakes them up, say at precisely 7 a.m. And then they need to eat something, so they take a pre-cooked breakfast from the freezer and defrost it in the microwave for exactly 50 seconds on the clock on the microwave. And then they go to brush their teeth. And many people today have this gadget, these electronic toothbrushes that you brush for 3 minutes and then the toothbrush beeps to let you know that 3 minutes have passed, you can stop brushing your teeth. And then you run to catch your train, which leaves exactly at 7:40 in the morning from the station. And similarly, you go to the gym for an hour to do your exercise, so you run on the treadmill in the gym until a beeper announces that exactly half an hour is over and you can go home and sit in front of the TV, because exactly at 7 p.m. in the evening, your favorite show starts. And you have to be exactly at 7 o'clock in the evening, otherwise you will miss it. And as you watch your show, every 5 or 7 minutes, the show is interrupted by commercials that cost $1,000 a second and which are inserted at precise moments. And so forth, and so on and so forth. Our entire day is run according to this precise timetable. And even when we go to meet our psychologist, our therapist, to complain about all the pressure in our lives, the usual therapy session lasts exactly 45 minutes. And after 44 minutes and 50 seconds, the therapist, even if we are in the middle of the most exciting story about our mother, he or she will say, "That's it, we're running out of time, let's continue this in the next session." So this is one amongst many revolutions in daily life and human mentality which are brought about by the Industrial Revolution, the revolution in time. I could give many more examples, but I don't have time to give all these examples, so I will focus only on the most important change, the most important upheaval brought about by the Industrial Revolution, which is the collapse of the family and the intimate community, and the replacement of the family and intimate community by the state and the market as the main controllers of human life. This tremendous revolution, the collapse of the family and the community, we'll discuss it in length in the next segment of this lesson.